Governor John Hickenlooper, along with former governors Roy Romer and Bill Owens, publicly addressed and supported standardized testing in Colorado this week. The three governors are at odds with wings of both parties who support Senate Bill 223, which would prohibit penalties for those who opt out of testing. Patty, the whole idea of standardized testing has become a huge issue this year, and I guess it was a little surprising to me seeing the bipartisanship on one side with Governors Roy Romer and Bill Owens supporting Governor Hickenlooper, and then Republicans and teachers unions coming together in the legislature supporting this. What did you make of it?
Well, certainly politics makes strange bedfellows, we know that, but the strangest combo, no one wants to get under the sheets with this group. The teachers union and the very, very conservative right-wing part of the party have been aligned together on this whole the testing issue all years at the legislature. It's been the strangest combination we've seen in a long time. So then it was kind of refreshing to see, oh, you can have Republicans and Democrats also playing nice together, more in the middle zone, which was seeing Romer and Owens up there. Also seeing that Romer, we should all be drinking from his fountain of youth. He just has a lot of vigor. He certainly knows education. They came out, they gave everyone a textbook lesson in how you could actually come to some agreement that's for the good of the kids. And I do think some of the things now going through the legislature looks like the more reasonable testing limit bill will go through. There's certainly going to be some Hail Marys at the end, but it was a good lesson yesterday.
David, were you surprised that there's this tentative working together relationship between teachers unions and pretty conservative Republicans on this issue, and really could it last beyond, could it last on this particular issue?
Yeah, I think it will continue to last on this issue. These three governors of very different political persuasions all have very strong records as education reformers. Back to early in the 90s when Roy Romer was the guy who signed the charter schools bill to create those, and many, many other accomplishments. They correctly recognized that when you were running a huge enterprise, whether you call that the enterprise is the Denver School District or the statewide program, where because it's our state taxes that mostly fund the schools, you need some measures to see how well the thing is working. Now, do you have to test 11th graders in social studies? No, not necessarily. But do you need a baseline to say, how well are kids learning to read year to year? Before these tests came in, we had, when my wife and I moved back to Denver, my wife, one of the things she did as a volunteer was literacy tutoring. And the guy she tutored was a graduate of Manual High School who was illiterate. Now that's a failed system where you can have 12 years of public education and not teach a guy how to read. The purpose of testing is to find out how well you're doing at that. And of course the teachers unions don't want any accountability for how well they're teaching, and they're right to say that the teacher isn't the only influence. The student's motivation, family circumstances, all of that come into effect. But if the job is education, you need to have some concrete measures of how well education is working. So the whole thing of like, oh, I'm going to opt my kid out of this, I hate high stakes testing. Well, it's not high stakes for the kid. Your kid doesn't get kicked out of school if you find out he's illiterate, but you do, then you know that's time to get that kid some help. It's high stakes for the teachers, but that is real life. You know, you want to be admitted to the bar, you have to pass an exam. You want to be a doctor, you pass an exam. There's lots of real life things where you better perform in a high stakes scenario. And it is irresponsible to run a multi-billion-dollar education system without a good, solid way to measure the outcomes.
And there's been a lot of development on this. There's been various bills, but what was the reaction from the Capitol, at the Capitol, to these three governors coming together in a pretty public forum in response to at least some of the bills?
I don't know that there was a ton of reaction. I mean, you just look at the Senate bill that we're talking about here, the one that basically gives districts cover when their students opt out. I mean, that passed 28-7. That is a veto-proof majority right there. Now, the trick is going to be, what is it going to come out of the House as? I think, and I've seen this more and more, the legislature seems to act as a body not of the state government, but as the state government. And I say that in the sense that But I don't think a lot of people worry so much about what the governor is saying in some of these issues. I mean, case in point, this is a little bit of a diversion, but the governor comes out with a plan 2 weeks ago to increase road funding and education funding by pulling the hospital provider fee out of the budget. And we are hearing crickets as far as a bill to be introduced regarding that. So I think the question is not what the legislature thinks of these governors saying it, but what the legislature thinks, period. Just today, the House passed a more moderate testing rollback, and they rejected a couple of amendments that would have gone further than this bill does. I think that may be an indication that they may not be as gung-ho as the forces on the left and the right were in the Senate to go farther with this. And I think that, though, will be the reason you may not see Senate Bill 223 enacted into law, more so than even 3 governors coming out and saying, please don't pass this.
Penn, you've had experience as a lawmaker. Is it influential when you see a governor come out with another 2 former governors making a pretty strong stance on an issue like this?
No, and here's why. You know what really. I think the more important thing is that there is huge bipartisan support for changing something. And I believe the reason is that all 3 governors, whom I respect greatly, have been reformers when it comes to public education, but not all reform is good. And what legislators have heard since CSAP, which first introduced, which I opposed, was that too many districts and teachers and school systems are teaching kids to the test, but not necessarily imparting the education they'll need to be functionally literate in society. And over time, at both the federal and state level, more and more testing requirements have been imposed, and we've gotten to the point where you spend too much time teaching to take a test rather than teaching to live a life. We do have systems of accountability, and if school systems need to be reformed, they need to be reformed such that grades mean something. And I mean grades for pupils and individual students, not grades for schools or neighborhoods. As legislators, what we often got that governors don't always get is, all of us have schools within our district. All of us have teachers within our district. Governors don't get accosted in aisle 13 of the grocery store by teachers saying what you're doing is crazy, but legislators do. So this is something they're very close to. They've heard for years that this is a problem, and they have finally said enough is enough. We need to roll back some of these testing mandates and get to a reasonable point where we can use some testing to see where we are, but we've got to let grades mean something also.